So, just so everyone is aware, this conversation is being recorded and I will publish it on our YouTube's note page tomorrow at the latest, maybe even tonight if I have the time after this. It depends. James is out, and then he's gonna come back and make me dinner. So if dinner's ready, then maybe not. But if it isn't, then it'll be up tonight. Anyways, thanks so much for joining us. The conversation tonight is going to be focused on finding credible information sources, which is really challenging. But before we get into the conversation, I'll leave it there. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? And maybe Esther, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Hi everybody. My name is Esther Olu. I am a cosmetic chemist slash formulator. I also do some SciComm on Instagram at the Melanin Chemist. Nice to see everybody again.
Cassandra, would you like to go next?
Hi, my name is Cassandra Celestin. I'm the beauty chemist on Instagram and other social media outlets. I am a cosmetologist. I'm also a cosmetic chemist and a trichologist. And I own a business that with consulting in cosmetic science called Beauty Alchemy Group.
Lolita, would you like to go next?
Hey everyone, my name is Lolita Iyer. Lovely to see everyone again this week. I'm also a cosmetic chemist and a psychommer over at Instagram at SkinChemy.
Wendy, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy. I'm an environmental scientist, and professionally, I focus on air and water quality and ecology. But on the side, I'm a content creator on Instagram as wasabi.chif.
Gloria and Victoria, do you guys want to go next?
Hi everyone, it's Gloria and I'm Victoria. Sounds like a comedy, weird comedy duo. We own the brand and Instagram account, Chemist Confessions. We do a lot of, psychom on Instagram. We recently wrote a book, Skincare Decoded. We also have a lean line of products. We're a formulation science chemist by trade, specializing in skincare. What she said.
And Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Wong. I'm a chemistry PhD with a blog better known as Lab Muffin Beauty Science. So I have a blog, which is actually in its 10th year now, which is ridiculous, I think. I feel like such a dinosaur online. I also have my Instagram page and a YouTube channel. My background is in chemistry as well as chemistry education. So I've been teaching chemistry since I was 14, actually. So that's about 17 years. No, my God, I thought I was 31. I don't know why. I'm not 31. I've been teaching chemistry for 20 years. And my old day job was actually as a chemistry teacher, the head of a chemistry education department at a tutoring college. So yeah, I have strong feelings about today's topic.
And so tonight was our attempt to open the conversation past just cosmetic chemists. So now we have another scientist in the room, an environmental scientist, and hopefully Nikki can come in. I'm going to continue working on it as you guys answer my first question. Some glitches that I need to figure out better on Discord. And if anyone knows the platform better, I would love your help if you have any tips. But my first question is, we could keep it in cosmetics or reach beyond because this this conversation is like kind of all encompassing for what's happening on the internet. But what do you see as some of the challenges right now with credible information in the beauty space? Michelle, do you want to go first with this? And yeah, this topic I think came at a good time after the cosmetics design article that I just found so triggering this morning. But I guess this is a good time to have this conversation. Anyways, Michelle, do you want to go first with this question?
I think it might be a bit dangerous to ask me to go first because I could probably talk about this topic for hours, but I'll try to keep it short. I think the biggest problem we have these days is we have too much information, but a lot of us don't really have the tools to pass through this information well because we're just not evolved for this. As humans, we have lots of cognitive biases. And this is how we see information unless we've been trained to sift through this information properly. So, and it really doesn't help that a lot of the companies that are producing this information, they aren't really doing it to necessarily put out good information, accurate information. Their motivations aren't that at the highest level. And so that's why we get things like articles, which are actually commercials. Yeah. And I think a lot of our systems, in terms of how journal articles get published, in terms of who decides what journal articles are done and whether or not they're fact checked properly, it's just not really, these systems aren't quite in place to deal with this sort of information overload. I believe the World Health Organization called it an infodemic in terms of all the misinformation around during the pandemic. And right now, I think we're seeing a lot of science communicators everywhere really, I guess, air out their frustrations at this problem where people don't have the tools to critically assess information. Yeah, I think that's like the high level explanation.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point about, I think, something that people often don't think about when they're reading magazine articles. And I had a really interesting talk with Nadine Baggett on my podcast last season, I think. But I guess the challenges with media is that they're run, essentially they're paid for because people don't want to pay for content by advertisers, and so they're kind of at the whim of their advertisers. So if the content doesn't agree, for example, with their advertisers, then it won't get published. I was a part of a few articles where they were featuring advertisers and advertisements, but it wasn't actually expressed as advertisement, which there seems to be some weird regulations that I don't really understand for printed media compared to what would be allowed on social media. But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point. Gloria and Victoria, do you guys want to go next?
Actually, I want to ask, what's the cosmetic design article you're talking about? I don't think
Oh
we've
my
seen that one
gosh.
yet. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, well, this article was by, maybe I shouldn't say who it was by. This proponent of organic ingredients. She has a distributor company, and she does a lot of consulting on sustainability for different conferences, although I don't know what her actual expertise is and how it is relevant to sustainability, but that's a side thought of mine. Anyways, the whole article was about, is clean beauty under attack? Yeah, and she just brought up a bunch of like kind of, I would say, invalid points. She was just like cherry picking left and right. And it was just really, really disappointing to see this kind of content being published with a trade magazine. But it shouldn't surprise me because I was also, maybe I'll just say, I'm going to say it because it's been really bothering me by this specific trade magazine. I was like a while ago quoted on like in a sustainability piece, and they went and also quoted a holistic nutritionist that was talking about how GMOs were ruining the world and going to cause breast cancer in the article. Like, oh, come on, we need to do better. So anyways, that was what was published. It came in my inbox this morning, and I was kind of triggered to read it. But anyways, yeah, that's what's happened. But do you guys want to chime in?
I mean, I
with
feel
the
like
question?
that's yeah, I think that's like a great example of like just the kind of madness that occurs with press. And that being generally the main, even like with professional press, though, trying to talk about these topics, and how like kind of confusing it can get. I honestly think the average reader and skincare user, only actually just anyone just trying to learn, that it just doesn't realize, like, first of all, science like moves very slowly in terms of data, and coming to any sort of conclusion, a lot of times that's questioned at honestly, every year. It feels like, again, to question it again. And so I feel like um, it's hard because nowadays, with information just at your fingertips and everything, every news article just trying to compete for its time on your screen, like, that's the kind of madness of it all. And just only wish like people could understand that a lot of times there very rarely is there like a very clear stance on something, especially in like research. So that's
Yeah.
my general feeling.
And I also feel like we just live in a field that I hate to say is not super duper scientifically rigorous. Like there's so many times like the two of us are doing like our research or whatever, and you'll see certain titles and articles that prop up an ingredient or a certain
Yeah.
test results. And if you actually open the article and look at their pictures and their data, it's nothing to write home about, and their abstract is actually totally blowing out of proportion. And I think even people who want to do their research, a lot of times they're stuck behind paywalls, and no one is gonna
Yeah.
most people won't read that closely. So it's just like a very unfortunate reality of this field.
Nikki, can you hear us? Slash.
I can.
Oh,
Can you hear
and I can
me?
hear you.
Yay,
Great.
my mic's working.
Woo.
Hi, everyone.
We figured it out. Okay, so I'm going to ask you two questions since you probably didn't hear my first two questions.
Okay.
So the first question is, would you mind introducing yourself? And then you could go right into the second question, which is, what do you see as some of the challenges in our space or beyond, however you want to answer this, with respect to credible information?
Okay, that's a loaded question. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Nikki, and I run and create content for Ugly Duckling Skincare on Instagram. I'm familiar with most of the people on here. So hi, everyone. And then the question was, what do I see as the biggest, was it obstacle or challenge when it comes to finding relatable sources? Was that the question, Jen?
Well, you can answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah, reputable, I guess, finding good information, challenges for good information in our space.
Yeah. So I come at it from the consumer perspective. So I definitely don't have the background that everybody on this call has in research and in your related field of study. So I think from my perspective, what I find is a challenge is finding information as a consumer when you don't have that scientific background, and finding a way to also communicate information to your audience and do all of the research that you possibly can when you don't have that background. So what I always recommend to anybody who's creating content, and what I try to do myself, is follow a lot of people on this call who are experts in their field, like Michelle from Lab Muffin, and yourself, Jen, and rely on that heavily for information, especially when you see articles like you talked on, just when I jumped on the call, you were saying something about a news source that was misrepresenting something or creating fear. I think that relying on experts in those types of moments is always a best call. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, I think that was a really good answer. Yeah, and I think sometimes 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 media don't know who the right experts are. I've been seeing this a lot. People assume that for example, in skincare, and I'm sure it's comparable in other spaces, but we've been seeing it a lot. First with the benzene stuff,
Yeah.
then with the PFAS stuff. There's probably been a whole bunch of other stuff that's happened as of late, where journalists just assume that, just like one example, that dermatologists are the like end all be all for skin care related expertise. When reality, there are like for example, analytical chemists that have direct experience with PFAS, or toxicologists, probably a better person to ask those questions. And then sometimes the misinformation spreads that way too, from the media not knowing who to talk to. Yeah, I'll leave it there. And maybe Wendy, do you want to go next?
Sure. And I think Nikki touched on this too, but what I see as being the biggest obstacle is just the inaccessibility of a lot of the literature to kind of the, I guess, quote unquote, general population, not just in terms of knowing where to get the information, but just the readability of the traditional peer-reviewed articles. Those, unless you have the background, and I think kind of many of us come from a place of privilege just in terms of our education, like we know how to read and digest this kind of information, but I think a lot of the general population doesn't have that education or a level of understanding. And so they're turning to things that are a lot more readable, like magazine articles. And those are the sources that tend to sensationalize things because that's kind of part of their business model that helps them generate profit. So it kind of makes more sense. So for me, that is kind of the biggest obstacle. And on a side note, I looked up that cosmetic design article that you were talking about. And the board of the organization that the author belongs to, there's not a single person with a scientific background. They're all either business people or distributors or manufacturing folks, but there's no one with a science background. So that kind of feeds into the point I was making, where it's become kind of a business to control this kind of misinformation and tailor it to a specific narrative.
Lolita, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying. I actually took a bunch of psychology classes in my undergrad because I just found it so interesting. And there was this one quote that really makes sense for this topic. It was from a psychologist, and the quote was, "It's not always easy to be both interesting and accurate, but it's better than being exciting and wrong." So I think that's something that really, resonates with this topic. And I find that often there's, especially lately, there's a disconnect between like what everyone is saying, news headlines, and the scientific research they cover. And, while headlines are designed to catch attention, they're not always accurate. Just an example that I read a couple of days ago, it was, or it was like something along the lines like new drug may treat cancer in like big bold letters. But when you really read the studies involved, two groups of mice. One was treated with the drug, the other was treated with the placebo. And the results showed that the mice that received the drug was cured, while the mice that did not receive the drug, the placebo, were not cured. But the conclusion was based on results from mice, so we can't draw conclusions on human disease. But you wouldn't know that by reading the headline. You would just think, oh, like there's a new drug that may treat cancer in humans. You would not, so I think there's a huge disconnect between what these articles are saying, and they're designed to be catchy. And that's where we see a lot of misinformation. And there's also this, I feel like there's like this race to be the first to be quoted on media for whatever topic, like PFAS or any other topic lately that's been surfacing the internet. And with that, whether it's a dermatologist, whoever it is, I feel like because they want to be the first to be quoted in a magazine, they don't spend enough time really understanding the research behind any of this. And again, with that spreads misinformation because you see them quoted in the article and it's, by a dermatologist. So you assume it should be correct. But in reality, it's just, a lot of these, like Jen, you mentioned, a lot of these journalists don't even really know who to ask these type of questions to. And so there seems to be a race, like who can be the first one to be quoted on a, article that we can like post on Instagram and tag everyone and this and that. So I think, in conclusion, I think there's a disconnect between the news headlines and scientific research.
Yeah, and maybe I'll also say something that I think Stephen said this, that it seems like some people care more about being famous rather than sharing accurate information. I've been seeing this more and more from quote unquote experts on social media, and I find it really disappointing. So, yeah, I'll just say that. And Cassandra, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying. I also agree, especially with what Lolita is saying. It's funny, I have a master's in psychology because I found it fascinating as well, especially working with clients in a salon setting. And the whole idea of them thinking certain potions would, grow their hair based on what they read and from, Self Magazine or one of those, creative type of fashion magazine. And that's the thing, people need to really know the distinction between creative writing and scientific writing. A lot of these magazines, like, Vogue and Elle and Self and all those that have those columns, those people are mostly doing creative writing. So it's not really a reliable source when it comes to something that you want to take really serious. And titles, even on social media, you'll see like, these big captions and they're misleading. Like Lolita said, you tap on them and you're like, wait, let me find out some more credible sources because I'm not getting the information I need from this source. And then you find out that it's all wrong, it's completely different. But, a friend of mine might have seen the same post and ran with it because people are lazy and they like to be spoon-fed. And they're not into, even if it's dumbed down for them, they don't really want to read. They just want to know what the facts are, and they just believe that these publications are not going to lie to them. So they're not even reading scientific journals. They're reading, fashion magazines and cosmetic magazines, and they're not even doing a good job with providing reliable information and trustworthy information.
And Esther, would you like to go next?
This writing off something that Lolita said earlier about how people want to be like the first to post about things, and this really just reminded me about what was happening with benzene and what happened with oh my god, I cannot speak right now. What happened with the succinic acid, and I think one of the things is that a lot of consumers are looking to professionals like dermatologists, another scientist for reliable information. But then when we have the problem with these same experts releasing like misinformation, for example, with succinic acid, this is something that Michelle brought up, which I think is like a really great point, where for example, with succinic acid, there's not any in vivo human data on it. So how can we say that it's great to, to treat a skin disease? Like, for example, and we're hearing that it's great for treating a skin disease from these same experts. So I think it's confusing consumers, and it's causing a struggle to find credible info on like what's true and like what's not true. Same thing with what's happened with benzene. Like we're hearing things about if it's really bad, or that chemists are intentionally adding it to formulas, because we're hearing this information from dermatologists who aren't necessarily trained on when it comes to skincare formulations, like chemists are. So I think it's just causing like a gap in understanding, which makes it hard to find which makes it harder for consumers to find credible info. So I think it's not only the misinformation is not only coming from like consumers, like, let's say trying to get like more followers or like get a bigger audience by spreading misinformation, but I think it's also coming from the experts that we also communicate with too. So I think it's like a problem, just like a problem on both sides.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
I want to add, it's okay. I just want to add to what Esther's saying. Also, the brands, you have the marketing people. And for many brands that I worked for and contract manufacturers, when I talk to the brands, they inflate the story. It's all a marketing story, and they run with this. So when they run with these stories that are not true at all, the other bloggers and other people grab onto it, and then they try to find they do like the mosquito sourcing type thing, and they try to find little things in there to add to their story to make their story a better article. And that's a problem also with the brands.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe add to what Esther was saying, that I think that when it's coming from like highly credentialed people, it's like even more pernicious because they seem really credible because they have these letters behind their name, but meanwhile they might not actually have relevant expertise. Um, yeah, I see this a lot at conferences, and also I'd be interested in what you guys think about the IFSCC debates that recently happened. I totally get Perry's approach. It seems like it might promote this like false equivalency when you have this toxicologist, say Mogen, with like a of like 20 plus years of direct expertise experience working as a regulatory toxicologist, and someone who is just entering the field but has a toxicology degree. uh one's opinion may hold maybe more weight in that conversation, but I can see it as someone who sees the relevant expertise on the panel. It's really hard for consumers to see that. So I find like sometimes people who don't really know what's happening get a platform, and it even happens at industry conferences. Also, some of these like misnomers are spread at like what you would think is like scientific conferences to scientists in the industry. Like for example, the idea that natural will be better. I've heard speakers at the technical showcase, the SEC technical showcase, bringing up that idea that like bio-based is going to be inherently better, when like reality maybe not so much. So I see that as a big challenge. It seems like finding credible information is like a challenge like across the board. Would anyone else want to add to that point before I ask my next question?
If I could say something really quick, Jen, when you first approached me with this topic, the first thing that came to mind was, I think this was back in 2014 or 2015. I was in grad school, and I remember reading this article on, maybe it was Yahoo with some kind of mainstream news site, about how meat and cheeses were super good for you and super healthy. And it was based on this study that found that people who had diets with high meat and cheese intake had higher levels of HDL cholesterol, which is like the good cholesterol. And it was like this big deal when the article came out. And then I look at the study, and this later was publicized as being a flaw of the study, but it was funded completely by like the dairy industry. So I think sometimes it's not just the media being like responsible for the way they disseminate this information, but the research itself can be biased. And these very highly credentialed, highly respected professionals, sometimes their research itself can be biased in a certain direction. So I feel like it's important that it's not just the media that is kind of responsible for all of this. It's kind of, the onus kind of falls on all of the players.
If you, oops. Yeah, I feel like there is a lot more to this first question, but I will move on to the next question, which would be, do you have suggestions for the everyday person on finding credible information? Cassandra, would you like to go first for this one?
Yes. For the everyday person, I'm going to take that example with my clients in the hair salon. Find credible resources such as, journals and peer-reviewed articles that that actually detail what's going on in the studies, as well as looking at the limitations. A lot of times people, I always go down to limitations to see, okay, what's going on. So I always tell them to do that because of the fact that they can understand what, for example, like the sample size is, and, if there's insufficient sample size, and, limited access to data. So, I tell them to look at that type of stuff, and just to see what's going on with that study, especially when it comes to like with trichology, when it comes to hair care, hair and scalp care and hair regrowth, because a lot of these companies out here are promoting all these overnight hair growth sensations with these oils and serums and vitamins. And a lot of my clients come to me and they swear by me that these things work. So I have to really school them on how to do the study. Like, why do you think it works? Oh, and they like, for example, somebody has like 22 inches of hair and they look down at their ends and they're like, oh, my hair is much healthier. And I'm like, well, that hair that you're pointing to right now at the end, the hair shaft, that's been on your head for the past 3 years. So if you're talking about healthy hair, you have to look at your roots. So let's think about the past 6 months and you have 3 inches of new growth, which is average. What is that doing? Is there a difference in that? And then they have to think about that. So I educate them on how to do the research for that particular issue that they're having.
Esther, would you like to go next?
I think for me, I mean, if I was like in the eyes of like a consumer, like who didn't have a scientific background, I would follow science-based science, like psychomers, like Michelle, Alita, Jen, to see the topics that they talk about. And usually everybody here, they cite where they get their sources from for further reading. I mean, I would personally know that the experts like you all, if you're linking a source, I would trust that it's credible enough for me to get at least some insight. And then everybody here, they digest it in a way, or they translate it in a way that consumers might not necessarily be able to understand just by looking at the source themselves. So I think following a psychomers is a great way to get credible info. I mean, at least for me, I like to read journals myself. Like I go on PubMed, or where else do I go? Or I read like the Journal of Cosmetic Science, for example, or I look at the CIR, COSING, all that stuff, just to get like a more full, like rounded perspective to like see if there's any nuance on certain topics. But I feel like as a consumer, definitely like follow science communicators that are able to digest things in an easier way. I don't think looking directly at the source or like doing your own research is the best route to do. So yeah, like I said before, following psychomers I think is like a great way to start.
Oh, I so agree with that, because people think that they're doing their own research, but they're just cherry picking studies or points, not really reading the whole studies often to confirm a preconception rather than looking at the body of evidence. And it's like super, super hard to critically assess research. So at some point, I so agree with this, at some point you're going to have to find experts that you trust. And who better than psychomers who are good at communicating science to consumers? Totally agree with that. Lolita, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think I would say whenever you read something, or just because something is presented as a fact doesn't mean it is a fact. So I would say be skeptical. And I don't want to sound negative or anything, but I think with lately, with the speed at which misinformation spreads, and the sources that dominate the media landscape are likely those that spread pseudoscience or even conspiracy theories, I would say just kind of take a step back and examine the sources and the author's credentials and affiliations. I would say always research the background of any resource that you come across. Consider the author's credentials, I would say, is also important. And affiliations, are they, associated with any type of special interest group or any, or another biased source of funding, perhaps. And so I would always say, like, when you read something, don't necessarily think that it's, just don't take it as a fact. Always question what you're reading, especially lately with the amount of, I mean, there's so much misinformation about COVID, online. There's even articles that are saying that it's a hoax. And, with just the amount of misinformation, I would say be skeptical and evaluate what sources are also cited by the author. And I would say make sure, the source is also up to date. A lot of the information that we've seen online is outdated. Technology moves quickly, and a lot of even reliable sites go out of date pretty quickly. So, be cognizant of that as well. Are you reading information that's also up to date? So I would say those are some of the takeaways that I would, recommend for somebody who's trying to find credible information online.
Wendy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I always tell people, and it's the boring answer, is to just read, journals, peer-reviewed literature. And if someone doesn't have the time, or maybe the language is a little bit too difficult to consume, then if anything, read the introduction and the discussion. That's always what I tell my friends who don't have a scientific background is, I mean, ideally you'd read the methods too, because a lot of the flaws, we can tease them apart in the methods, but if you're just out there for information, just read the intro and the discussion. Those are usually pretty easy to digest. Relying on resources from government agencies or organizations more than businesses. And as Esther mentioned, SciCommers, I just feel like we live in a time where we have so many resources and people are just providing free information. They're providing their expertise for free online. And I feel like that's such a great underrated resource, and people really should be taking advantage of that. And for some people, they just really want to continue on with the media articles, and I think it's just important that if that's the route people want to go, they need to realize that as they're reading all of these different magazine articles and columns, that maintain awareness that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of what all of these articles are saying, recognizing your own confirmation bias, like you mentioned, Jen, that people will usually go out to cherry pick the studies and the articles that are already supporting what they want to think. So just maintaining that self-awareness so that we don't fall into that trap, I think is really important. But above everything, I think SciCommers have really made a huge difference in this community and in a lot of other industries, and helping consumers have access to all the information.
Gloria and Victoria, do you guys want to go next?
I mean, ultimately, I think this is really tough. A lot of people don't have time, and it's so habit forming to just scroll TikTok or Facebook. So, I think for us, we always tell people two things. One is kind of know your experts. Maybe what other people saying, like know your SciCommers, but also kind of know where their background is too, because every one of us is also prone to our confirmation bias or kind of our background. Know what a derm typically knows, know what a chemist typically knows, know what estheticians typically know, because these people all specialize in different things. Might talk about fields that we are not super experts in, but just be aware that even experts being quoted can sometimes be a little misguided when they step out of what they know best. We try to educate people on basic scientific reading if they want to try to dabble. I think the thing is reading a lot of scientific journals is very daunting for people, typical people without a scientific background. So just basic terminology like what's in vitro, what's in vivo, look for a sample size, just look for keywords. Even that I think can make a really big difference. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and we always say that, especially when it comes down to, just honestly just finding a decent product and will it work, like, even dissecting a clinical can get a little daunting. So yeah, like Gloria mentioned, establishing hopefully a decent sample size. I mean, it's pretty hard to find one that would even do a placebo, but at least there's some data behind like what they're saying is it's sadly already better than most. And I kind of really agree with Lolita in that, like, really trying to get people to not have a knee-jerk reaction to a headline, I think is actually also a challenge, because I mean, just, if you're on Reddit, I I highly doubt people are actually like even clicking into the links that are being shared. And when you do, I always find like the R Science thread to be pretty fascinating because, you know, there's like new studies that will come out and it's always great. It's always kind of therapeutic to see people kind of share their comments about, hey, this method seems a little weird or something sketch. But I mean, I sadly it's the nature of it all. So agree with that, you know, having a healthy bit of skepticism, um, maybe not forming an opinion too quickly. Those are all great habits to start with.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good point to not draw a conclusion right off the bat. And
Yeah.
it's so I think a lot of people want a black and white answer right away, and that's just not how it works in a lot of difficult questions.
Yeah.
Nikki, would you like to go next?
Can you hear me?
Yes, oops. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I would say a few things. So one, and I'm just repeating what I've already heard from Lolita and a few other people on here, is find credible sources. I think relying on experts, and I think it's really important, the delineation, to figure out what does a dermatologist know and what's their area of expertise. What does a chemist know? What's their area of expertise? I think by knowing that, that'll help consumers be armed with, you know, who do you trust with specific information. So I think that's really important. I think it's important for people just to stay curious and to ask questions. I think that if something normally seems too good to be true or is really sensationalized, it probably is. So I think that's why it's so important to diversify your sources of content, and especially when you're doing research, like that's key. I also think that if you don't have a background in research, like the only research I did was essentially university. And then now I like PubMed, but I definitely don't have the scientific background to be able to understand some of those studies. So what I personally have been doing is accessing Coursera courses. So I don't know if any consumers are listening. I think that you can always expand your knowledge. And at least if you are going to create content that has some science behind it, do everything that you can to understand the content that you're talking about, I think is really important. And yeah, I think essentially just diversify your sources of content and stay curious and follow experts for their area of expertise would be my advice.
I love that you brought up Coursera. I so agree with that. There's so many free places to educate yourself. I also really like Khan Academy. If anyone is interested in taking free science courses, I took a few of their science courses. First, I repeated some courses that I did while I was in my undergrad. They were like pretty comparable to what I did in undergrad, and they were free. So if you want to take these courses, like if you want to learn about organic chemistry, they have a course for that, or physics, or history, or politics, or whatever. Yeah, it's really amazing that there are these free sources that you can go and learn. Yeah, second that, definitely. And Michelle, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I agree with what everyone said. There's no real substitute for really knowing that subject area and going through journal articles. But obviously, all of us have lives and we can't read in that level of detail about everything. Like, I'm sure everyone here probably has delved into journals about beauty products, but I mean, all of us probably care a little bit about what we eat, and we probably don't go a lot very deep into nutrition journals. So I think the next best thing is to know, to follow experts, know what their expertise is. And also, I think it's important to follow a range of experts, because every expert has blind spots. And knowing what their blind spots are and knowing where they're likely to be right. And even if, like, for example, you care about a topic that's covered by dermatology, dermatologists aren't always right and they don't always agree on things. So I think it's important to follow a range of experts who are right a lot of the time. And so hopefully with that, you can get a pastiche of what should be right. And I think one extra thing to add is just maybe read up about cognitive biases and how to assess the strength of arguments. Because I think even if you do follow a range of experts, sometimes it's like a new area and it's good to be able to assess the strength of their arguments rather than just try to blindly trust experts, which works most of the time, but sometimes there's always things where someone who is an expert is just completely wrong. I think we've seen this a lot during the pandemic where there's been a lot of arguments between experts, and there's been things that have been, the status quo that just hasn't been questioned for a really long time because of political reasons. So things like whether or not COVID can be airborne, for example, has been a really hot area of debate. And it's a lot, I guess, more reliable to be able to actually assess the argument itself. But yeah, in lieu of that, then following a range of experts and going with what most experts say the body of evidence is saying is probably the next best course. And it is a bit more efficient, to be honest. It's a lot less onerous on a typical consumer to do that.
I want to give an example real quick, Jen. So I think like a great way example of this about diversifying the experts that you look at was that I think it was like a month or two ago where a dermatologist was reviewing a skincare brand and there was gold in the ingredient list, and they kind of thought that, oh, there's no reason that gold should be there. That gold is very irritating to the skin. It's probably just like a filler. And then we have chemists that ended up chiming in as to why there was gold in the formula. It was because it was used as to stabilize the vitamin C. It was a method of encapsulation. So I think that instead of just relying on the derm for saying, okay, gold is irritating, I think it's also important to understand why chemists formulate with gold. So diversifying helps to understand. I think it gives more nuance instead of just relying on one expert in one field of expertise for information. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'll maybe add to Michelle's point about familiarizing yourself with cognitive biases. There's this book that I love so much, and I feel like the world would be a better place if everyone read it or listened to it. There's an audiobook. This is not an ad. I really, really like the book called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. They also have a podcast, but the book is excellent. I could not recommend this book enough because they dive into some of these cognitive biases so that you can kind of see this in yourself and then be more critical about the things that you see. Okay, so we've been talking about just under an hour. We've only gone through 3 questions. So I guess I'll ask my final question, but also if anyone in the audience has any questions, since we're short on time, if you want to put your questions in the webinar chat text channel, then I'll ask your questions after my next question, which is pretty basic, but I feel like you guys can add a lot to the conversation with this question, which is, do you guys have any final take-homes that you'd like to leave with our audience, or any important insights you think that's important that we haven't covered that you'd like to add to this conversation? Michelle, would you like to start with this one?
I don't think I really have that much. I guess it's just the usual things like once you start learning how to assess arguments critically, then I think a lot of these things become obvious, like what things to look out for. So like conflicts of interest, whether or not there's relevant expertise, whether or not the body of evidence reflects what's going on, whether or not the experts themselves are showing cognitive biases. So I don't know. I think this is a weird thing to say, but I think it really does help if we do read about critical thinking rather than just reading about beauty. And I think it will help in lots of different areas of your life as well. Once you start learning about how to critically assess arguments, and you end up making better decisions. So I think it's a really good investment to, learn about cognitive biases and critical thinking. And you'll probably save yourself a lot of money that way too.
Just because I've seen some confusion on this point before I get to Nikki for this question, there's some confusion about what the body of science, what the body of evidence means when we're saying this. I know we're all familiar with this, but I know many people aren't. So what do you mean by that, Michelle?
So I think everyone has probably heard of this saying, but you can find a study to back up anything. So a lot of the time, I guess, I'm sure everyone on this panel has had this experience where they post something and then someone says, but what about this study? This study says the opposite of what you're saying. Why should I believe your study over this study I found? So the body of evidence means you look at all of the evidence and you see where all of the evidence points to. So in science, there's always outliers, there's always fluke results. So people might remember ages ago, there was this physics experiment that showed that you could travel backwards in time. And it turns out the reason they got that result was because there was a loose cable in their equipment. So this sort of thing happens a lot of the time. There's always little errors, usually not as dramatic and exciting, but yeah, little errors happen and experiments will disagree with each other. Sometimes, you know, someone accidentally spat in their vial and that ruined their results. So you need to look at multiple pieces of evidence. And if there's lots of different types of evidence and lots of pieces of evidence pointing towards the same result, then scientists will say that that is probably what, I guess, the truth is. So yeah, that's what the body of evidence means. You look at all of the results in totality and look at what they're saying.
You know, maybe I'll just ask this question to any of the scientists in the room who want to answer this. But I think that there's maybe this is a challenge here that could be helped addressed by better critical thinking. But like people being uncomfortable with the fact that science changes and is nuanced and complicated. So like what we know now might be different in the future, and then people are uncomfortable with that with respect to safety of ingredients. They'll be like, well, it might be unsafe. We might learn this in 10 years that it's unsafe. Oftentimes people will be like, oh, look at the tobacco industry. That's what happened. I don't know if there's really even anything to add to this, but if anyone wants to add to this, but I think that a challenge is people are uncomfortable with the fact that science changes, it evolves, and then also media reporting. I feel like it often, well, maybe not often, I'm not sure if this is the case, but it at least sometimes impacts public perception of science, because then if they feel like, oh, well, scientists keep changing their minds, so why do I trust them? Yeah, I feel like that could be a challenge. If anyone wants to add to that, feel free. Otherwise, I will go to Nikki. Nikki, would you like to chime in next?
Sure. So some closing takeaways, I think, too. So if you're a consumer and you're listening to this, I think follow the scientific community, diversify your sources, ask questions, and try to put in the work to do some of your own research. I love Michelle's comment on just understanding cognitive biases and doing that research, which I think can help in the rest of your life too. Another book that I recommend, just on your recommendation, Jen, The Death of Expertise, is such a great book too. So if anyone's interested, that's a good read. So I think also, just as a consumer, try not to participate in the spread of misinformation. And I think it's so easy for stuff to spread like rapid fire, especially on TikTok. So I think if you see something that's a little bit sensational and maybe doesn't make a lot of sense or doesn't have much to back it up, you can stop that by not sharing it or not engaging with that content. So maybe don't engage and then verify first before you just add to that rapid fire spread. And then if you're a content creator, which I am, I think if you don't have a background in science, I think you have a responsibility to your audience to just put in the work and try to provide the most accurate information. Be open to the fact that you might make mistakes, but no one's perfect. And I think that's all part of learning, and that's all what we're trying to do here. So that's it.
Gloria and Victoria, would you guys like to go next?
Jen, I think what you said about people being uncomfortable with science's progress is a very real problem. And they're also very uncomfortable with experts disagreeing, which is really normal in science as we're learning more. And that's something that honestly, I don't know what's the solution for it other than just trying to educate and trying to get people to understand that, you know, we as a species is just a learning progress, and it's okay to ask questions, but be wary of people that really just segment the world into four black and whites, because we are still trying to answer a lot of questions. And agree with Michelle, critical thinking is probably underappreciated right now in today's world, and it could really help everyone. And I know like there's areas in my life that I'm just tapped out. I don't really want to critically assess anything anymore. And you can definitely fall prey to sensationalized media and marketing lingo, but also be understanding of people who do get into that, and your followers are just trying to do better and learn through you. So I think sometimes people get really angry at other people who they think are ignorant, but the reality is like we're all ignorant of something. And yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I think just a little more patience with everyone, as everyone's not always on, some people are just beginning, some have been, knee deep in skincare for a long time. And that's something we try to, I guess always think of whenever we get a not so friendly comment. And I think like just for us, like we're very much okay with being in the gray. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more exhausting, and sometimes the conclusion is lackluster. But there's something I don't know why, but people really want to have a firm stance to stand on their platform and say something. So I would say that if everyone could just be a little bit more comfortable in the gray, that opens up communication so much more. It opens up so much room for learning and learning from each other and learning from different perspectives. And that's kind of just the wish I hope everyone can have, as both like followers and experts.
And Laurel P. Sorry. It's end of day here.
All right, we're gonna.
But yeah, that's our.
Lolita, would you like to go next?
Sure. So to add, I mean, I agree with everyone. I also wanted to add another interesting topic that I learned about in one of my psychology classes, where we learned about pre-bunking, which I thought was a really interesting concept. So we all know what debunking information, you debunk incorrect information once it has spread. But what I learned is that something that's actually sometimes more effective is pre-bunking, where you inoculate people against fake news before they're exposed to it. And that's something that I sometimes try. It's very hard to do, but it's analogous to the process of like immunization, where we find that pre-bunking or preemptively warning and exposing people to small doses of misinformation can kind of cultivate this mental antibody against fake news. Just the other day, or was it yesterday? I saw a scientist online on Instagram talk about how formaldehyde releasers cause cancer. And I was taken back, because this scientist is a pretty credible scientist. And but my whole thing is that there have been a lot of other scientists like myself, Michelle, Jen, who have already kind of debunked this, or let's say pre-bunked this before it spread viral on social media. But it's a very hard concept. But I think pre-bunking is a strategy that I try sometimes on my page before something goes viral. I don't know if it's effective, but that's something I've learned in psychology from a behavioral scientist that I feel could be helpful in the future. But like everyone else said, whenever you read something, to reiterate, like I said before, be skeptical and ask questions. Don't be afraid to check with different sources. Look for consistency in information. If you find, you may think it's a credible source, and but then when you read another article, you may find conflicting information. So I always try to find consistent information whenever I try to find credible information online. But I just wanted to add the bit about pre-bunking, which I thought was pretty cool and an interesting concept.
Wendy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound too negative, but I think really the most important thing is to be skeptical. People, and I'm guilty of this too, we assume anything that we see on a paper or on a screen is kind of the truth. If it wasn't the truth, why would it be there kind of attitude? But I mean, we have studies that show financial funding sources are a really strong predictor of outcomes. So there's always going to be these kinds of biases in science and science communications. So I think it is just really important to have that skepticism. And I do think it's a really important point, both as scientists and as consumers, to not be so kind of stubborn and staunch in our own opinions. And, we need to understand that literature and science is kind of ever changing, and we need to be willing to change with it. And I do agree that I think people are really uncomfortable with that idea of change and uncomfortable with conclusions that aren't black and white. So, I encountered this when I posted like a while back about, and I know a couple of us have posted about the coral reef with sunscreen situation and how the evidence is inconclusive. And I got a lot of angry DMs from people because they didn't really understand that, this is based on the current understanding, based on the current literature, and that could change at any time. But currently, the research doesn't support the conclusion that sunscreens impact coral reefs. And the whole point of this debate is that reef safe marketing is inaccurate because the evidence is inconclusive. But I think anything inconclusive kind of puts that in the gray area, and I think people want something that is very easy, very black or white. And so kind of understanding that the science doesn't always take us in such a clear direction is really important, just as a general consumer, to understand that when we're doing our own research.
And maybe this would be something I'd be interested if you guys agree with me, but maybe this would be something to look for in your experts. Look for nuance. Black and white statements are, I mean, sometimes things are black and white, but most of the times the accurate stuff is in those shades of gray. The world is complicated. So sometimes it's not just oftentimes it's not just this black and white thing. Yeah, my recommendation, look for nuance in the experts who you follow. Cassandra, would you like to go next?
Yeah, with what, it's funny what Wendy was just saying about the coral reef. I remember a few years back, the suppliers came to a contract manufacturer where I was working, and they were talking about removing some of their raw materials because of this issue. And to be honest with you, because with the contract manufacturer, you have so many clients that you're dealing with, you have to present this to the client, and the client has to decide if they want to deal with it or not. And the client will ask you, well, what do you think as an expert? And then you give them your opinion, because at that time there wasn't enough information on it. Well, still it's not enough information, but it was definitely brand new. And the client said, you know what, if this is going to be a problem in the future, we don't want to formulate with these materials. So you, as a formulator for a brand contract manufacturer, you have to go with it. You can't really do much about it. So first I would say, Google is not a university, so be wary of that. Don't Google everything. And refer to scientific communications and experts like these ladies here on the stage. And a lot of people I see on social media, they want to be seen as experts, and they don't do the proper research, and it's almost like they want to be cookie cutters, and they're like, oh, I like what Michelle's doing, oh, I like what Jen is doing, I want to do the same thing, I'm going to post something just like this. And and then they really don't want to do it. They just want followers, be honest with you. They just want to be seen as someone that knows about something about beauty or whatever the topic is that they're posting. And I think these people really need to assess what they're doing, because I know me myself, like I've done with psychology, I've done tons of research paper. With cosmetology, I've written for several publications. And for me, it's a lot of work. It's a lot. I don't have time to do it now. So hats down to you all, because it's a lot of work and you have to be thorough. And I'm a person that I have to be thorough. So when people ask me my opinion about, certain things, and they're like, oh, this thing just did diminish my blemishes and it's just snake oil, or it made my hair grow and it's just snake oil, and they're like, no, it works, I saw it work, and I'm like, look, I can't give you my opinion on that unless it's I do a clinical research with it, and I'm trained in clinical research. So people are like, oh, why can't you tell me? I'm like, I can't, because as a scientist, I have to be credible. So I can't give you that information without either reviewing all the sources or actually being part of the study. So I think people need to be wary of a lot of the people on social media that are cookie cutters, and they want to be like, the women on this panel and seem like experts, and they're not. They're just, cherry picking and just putting out a few things for, just so they can get followers.
And then last but not least, Esther, do you want to chime in?
I was honestly not going to say anything, but then with what Cassandra just said, it reminds me of the EWG. I know we hate this word. I know we hate them, but it just reminds me that the EWG is so sensational. I mean, when we Google is X cosmetic ingredient safe, they're the first ones to come up. Similar to how, like, let's say we're looking up something on TikTok. Not that I ever would, but let's say if we're like looking up something skincare related on TikTok, the ones that cause the most sensation, and they can be completely incorrect and spread a lot of fear, they're the ones that blow up the fastest. Similar to what happened with the DMDM hydantoin. People don't even care what they're saying as long as it gets them the followers and the likes. That's all that matters to them. So I think it. Like everybody said earlier, definitely diversifying your sources, and trying to understand like what psychomers are portraying, and understanding that doing your own research is not necessarily the best thing to do. Relying on experts and looking at the nuance is so important in beauty, and obviously deleting the EWG is important too. That's all.
Oh, I just want to bring up one point that Cassandra and Esther just kind of talked around. It's really easy to get kind of in this like echo chamber on social media, especially the algorithms. It's really insidious for how that impacts the information you get. Also, though, because of biases, which like being aware of biases would probably be helpful in this, but will have you gravitate towards more negative information. And I had a conversation with Tim Caulfield, which I highly recommend listening in, but something that he shared with me is that people who are anxious, like if they're seeing like scary information, they're more likely to spread it. And so this information, if it bleeds, it leads. There's a reason why journalists do this, catches more consumers, and then they're anxious, and then they're more likely to spread it, and then that's the information, and then people feel like, because like most of the information on social media, on the internet, it seems, I think on the internet, I think that would be a fair statement about cosmetics specifically, and it probably applies to other industries. Most of the information is incorrect. And so then, like, when I have these conversations with people in my my real life, like my non-internet life, who don't really know what I do, sometimes they feel like I'm like this like conspiracy theorist, or like this weirdo that's talking about safety of cosmetics. They're like, what do you mean? If I look on Google, like the first 3 pages of Google is going to tell me that this is right. So yeah, the internet makes it really, really, really hard. The way algorithms work, echo chambers. And yeah, does anyone else want to add to that point? This might have opened up Pandora's box. Michelle, I'd be interested, especially in your opinion here. Oh,
about
Esther. Yeah, sorry.
that as soon as the article got released on the Dermatology Times, if I'm not mistaken, everybody, I mean, a whole bunch of derms hopped on that like within like the speed of light. They hopped on that so fast, and a lot of them are saying, "Oh, the FDA is recalling sunscreens." No, they weren't. There was no sunscreens that were being recalled, but everybody wanted to post about it first, and it's just so crazy. Like exactly what Jen's talking about.
Okay, so we've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes. Thank you guys so much for agreeing to be a part of this conversation. I know there was one question that was asked in the webinar text channel. And also, if anyone else has questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to ask it there. But if anyone on stage has the time to go look at the webinar chat text channel and answer a question, no pressure, but if you have the time, that'd be greatly appreciated. That would be amazing. This conversation is going to be published probably tonight because James still isn't home. This conversation is going to be published on our Notes YouTube channel, which I will publish on our webinar chat text channel. But thank you to our audience for tuning in, and big thank you to all of the experts who joined us for the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. 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 You.